Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Elder Empire, Book 3. I guess it's Shadow Book 3. I was going to say Book 3 of the Shadow series. I don't think that's quite right. Of Killers and Kings, chapters 17, 18, and 19. In these chapters, we get to watch Yala sweat as the Regents ask her a lot of very pointed questions about what she was supposed to do versus what she actually did. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Asher for commissioning this episode. Asher is here in the chat. So we have a lot happening in these. I mean, it's interesting because I'm going to just double down on what I said last time, which is that Calder isn't dead. And it's just supported by the fact that his body is not recovered. What I would kind of love, to be honest, and I'm not saying in this book in particular, but in general, is I would love an author to have a moment where the body disappears and people are very suspicious that a person is actually still alive because there's no body. And we find out for sure as readers that they are actually dead, but the characters in the story are constantly paranoid because they actually don't think the guy is still alive. Or they do think he's still alive. They're constantly on edge that he may rear his head at any point. I suspect that we are going to find out Calder had some sort of artifact on him, or there was somebody who came to his aid that had abilities that were able to save him. And because it seems like the attempt at murder, she was really going for it. So it could either be that was genuinely Calder and somehow he just managed to stay alive. Or it could be that was yet another body double, which I wouldn't be mad at that either. The idea of having multiple body doubles, that just makes sense, you know? So we'll see eventually. But I found it surprising that the fact that his body wasn't recovered doesn't seem to bother Shera. She's mostly annoyed at the fact that this means they can't prove he's dead. But there isn't even the slightest flicker of doubt for her that he's definitely dead. And I was just expecting there to be some suspicion, but I realized Shera doesn't have that kind of a suspicious mind. She has a suspicious mind in terms of what's right in front of her being maybe not what it looks like and needing to worry about the issue at hand. But I really feel not thinking about that or worrying because she feels like she did the kind of thorough murder that she always does, just trusting that it went the way that it always goes. I guess that's really not out of line. Oh my God. Asher in the chat says, I mean, she was pretty thorough, and I think I just used the word thorough murder. That was an accident, but we are in agreement that if there is anything Shera is, it is thorough. So we have an opening in chapter 17 from a textbook, Introductory History of the Empire. And basically what this says is that out of all of the regents, they all, of course, can be criticized for various things. But that the one regent that most people seemed to think was the most would be the most compassionate and appropriate ruler if they were going to try to transition to a time of peace was going to be Loralee. And later on, we get a delightful sequence with Loralee. Also, we find out that she's the Emperor's daughter, which I did not see coming, and I really want to know who her mother was. I'm not sure how important that is, or if we will ever find out, but that's dope. So, it could be like, I don't know. It's just interesting to me. So, when Joran arrived at the Emperor's stage, the battle ended. That is the first line of this chapter after that little introductory paragraph. It was a better result than Shera had hoped for. Shera, Joran, a handful of gardeners, and a few supporting teams infiltrated the crowd watching Calder's speech. Then, when they saw Shera's signal, they were supposed to march in and retrieve her and then run from the city. The Imperialists had, of course, sealed up the tunnels they'd used to escape the Imperial Palace the first time, so they had planned a new escape route. It was unreliable, to say the least, being a network of civilian homes, but they had hoped never to use it. And the idea that it is a network of civilian homes, all I could think is, like, are you guys just busting in through some rando's front door who just got home from work and he's in the middle of taking his shoes off and getting a beer? And you just are like, hey, sorry, just got to pass through here out your back door real quick for a second. Like, how does that work? But anyway, the moment he Joran tore down the wall of the Emperor's stage with his corrosive intent, all the Imperial guards that had been protecting Calder threw down their weapons. Meia and the Regent came through the wall to see a bunch of guards kneeling in surrender. The two champions were already gone. And this is when we find out that they took Calder's body with them. There was no doubt that he was dead, not with Shera's testimony and the handful of Imperial guards who had seen the body, but now there was no way to prove it. I am absolutely desperate to know how this has been pulled off. I need to know. And taking his body away would make sense in either case, that he survived and they somehow saved him, or that wasn't actually Calder, but they want everyone to think Calder really is dead so that basically there won't be any further attempts because I think the job's done. So it says they only had one authority figure left, the Regents. It was a change so abrupt that it startled Shera. So these guys that are meant to be serving the Emperor, as soon as the Emperor is taken out of play and Joran shows, they immediately are like, okay, well, I guess we serve you now. And it takes her a little while to sort of understand that these dudes haven't really got, the loyalty that these people feel, if they feel any genuine loyalty. And that's always a question for me, because there's a loyalty that's born out of a sense of duty. There's a loyalty that is born out of a genuine liking and belief in somebody. And there's a sense of loyalty that almost can come from fear and shame. And if somebody doesn't genuinely believe, then they're going to sort of turn to whatever person is in charge and be willing to do what needs doing. And honestly, the majority of people in the world are like that, including myself. I've mentioned before that I tend to be too respectful of authority figures. And if somebody kind of puts themselves forward as being in charge, there's a sense of relief to thinking they are going to take care of it. It calms you down. It makes you feel like you're in the hands of somebody who is more capable, and there is a comfort to that. So Shera and Meia both are like, I don't trust these guys. And then they sort of spend some time and they're like, oh, actually, they seem to genuinely want to just do whatever they're told because they are really afraid And it probably is also just really unstable lately, and they're just looking for something to be like consistent. And I love the thing that she says is like, well, okay, they trust Joran, but when it comes to her, like a few of them try to attack her. So she is certainly not at a point where she can relax. And she doesn't blame them, for the record. She's just kind of like, well, yeah, I literally murdered the Emperor, and I have been up against y'all many times, so that's fair. And then we have to deal with the people of the capital. And they are all aware some shit has happened, despite not knowing exactly what it is. They don't know the Emperor is dead. They just know some shit has happened, and it was pretty major. And I adore this moment. Joran, who is this badass, I don't even, juggernaut, really feels like the word. He is so uncomfortable trying to make a speech in front of this crowd. So he has a speech that was written for him. And there's a moment where he starts off, and I think that he's just going to speak from the heart. And he says, well, you see, here's the thing of it. And I'm like, okay, Joran, interesting way to start things off, but please continue. I am interested to hear. But then he just dives right into reciting something from memory. In the name of the remaining regents, Loralee and Esther and myself, I declare an end to the internal conflict that has been called the Guild War. We intended to overlook the actions of the so-called Imperial Steward, but the criminal behavior uncovered by Esther and revealed in today's news sheets persuaded me that I could no longer remain indifferent. And the crowd is kind of going nuts at this point, and some of them seem to be like glad of it, and other people are clearly very upset. And Shera is starting to get kind of twitchy about whether or not they will be able to keep this entire crowd under control, because they don't have as many people with them as they maybe should have for something of this magnitude. The Imperial Steward Calder Martin has been taken into our custody. From now on, the other regents and I will resume our collaboration with the regional governors in managing the empire. We encourage the other guilds to return and help us rather than clinging to division. That is all. And he is like sweating and just in a bad place when he leaves the stage. And I love that Shera has a moment where she's like, I kind of want to like fuck with him a little bit, but I'm tired, so no. And Meia comes up and asks Shera, how do you feel? And she just says, tired. It says, if she had expected Shera to spare Calder after everything, she had set herself up for disappointment. What now? Meia asked. Now, Shera said, I find someone else to do my job. Now, I've got Asher in the chat says, I feel you, Joran. I really do. Also, he does have a cheat sheet, which I would too. Yet, it's so funny to me. I think the fear of public speaking is like the number one fear on average. Like, that's the thing that most people are desperately afraid of. And it has so never been a problem for me, obviously, that when I found that out, I was blown away. It was like fear of heights, fear of death. Those all come fucking like second and third to fear of public speaking, which is wild. And that's not to say that I don't like agonize about how it's going to go or how I did, but it's not the fear of doing the thing. It's the fear of like feeling incompetent, which is pretty much the same feeling I have about doing most things. So it's not any, there's no like sort of sense of difference to that for me. But anyway, this moment I'm just going to mention later on, because Meia's saying, how do you feel? And Shera being like, if she had expected her to spare Calder, Shera's being like, Meia was going to be disappointed. And I started thinking here that maybe Meia, because I had said before that I was considering Meia being the person who told that Shera was going to make this attempt. And it's interesting because, like, they knew Shera was going to make an attempt. There's no way they didn't know that. But this attempt is very different than the first. You know, she is, the amount of information that it seems was shared feels very high considering what they were prepared for. And that was really what made me think maybe it was Meia. And so, if it were Meia, and she were really in on things, maybe Meia would know if Calder weren't actually dead. But then when we go to her POV, she seems to actually think that he is dead. And it brings up sort of the question that I really should have thought of, and maybe I did. It's hard sometimes to remember what occurs to me when I'm doing like a live recording. But when I was talking about whether Meia is the one who spilled the beans, I didn't really stop and think about how intensely she would have to feel in order to go up against an authority figure. Because we know that Meia is like me, where she really does respect authority. She truly believes that the people who are making decisions are the ones who are qualified to be making those decisions, and that they are working with more information and more wisdom and more experience, and that in general, you can trust what they're telling you. And even if you don't have all of the information, even if they're not even being really fully honest with you, maybe that's because you don't need to know. And of course, with this situation, it's going to be a little bit tempered by the fact that she knows Shera personally and is aware of Shera's shortcomings. But I sort of thought like Meia would be like, oh yeah, I really don't want her to kill him, so I'm going to go and like let them know. And I stop and think about it, and she wanted Shera to spare Calder in a general sense, but there was no intense passion behind that request. And so I'm saying that like it's not impossible that Meia would eventually break the rules and do something that was sort of like backstabby, but I think it would have to be something a lot more concrete to her that she really had a strong moral objection to, versus this where Shera's like, why should I trust you over Esther 6? And she's just like, a feeling, and she knows that's not enough. So all in all, I'm going to take Meia being the one who betrays Shera off the table. And I'm going to say, as of right now, I think it was Yala. Honestly, if I'm going to guess that anybody is like fucking around and doing shady shit, it's mostly going to be Yala. Pretty much. So this is when we go to Laura Lee, and this is so delightful. So first of all, Laura Lee is on this ship, and she is going by a pseudonym. What is it? Trying to find this spot, because she is addressed by this name, by the captain. And Madame Sunblood, that's what it is. And Laura Lee really thinks that she's like under the radar right now. And I kept thinking, there is a sense, based on what we have read from other people's perspectives when they are around the Regents, there is a sense to them of importance, of age, of power. Kind of like, thinking about the pressure of someone's spirit in Cradle being something that you can veil, you can hide it, but there's still tends to be a sort of like authority about the way you hold yourself and your energy that can be revealing without that spirit being unveiled. So in this whole scene, I kept thinking, they have to know who she is, right? They have to know who she is. And they are so odd about things that I kept... So it starts off with her cleaning the deck. And one of these, like, sailors, this crewman, comes over and is just like, can you stop? We don't make passengers do our work for us. And it says she didn't look up, but she was sure he was wringing his hands. Now look, I'm sure that if any passenger just starts scrubbing the deck, they would be like, dude, what are you doing? But there was something about the he's wringing his hands that made me go, they feel super weird about this because they like know what her deal is. And this is extra demeaning in their eyes, you know? So she's thinking about how it's been a long time since she's been on the Aeon Sea. And she's thinking about, and I thought this was really interesting. It shouldn't feel like too long. It had only been a few years since she woke up, but the coffin didn't shut out time entirely. Though it had physically felt like nothing more than a long nap, some part of her had always been distantly aware of the decades passing. About 2 centuries this time, though she hadn't learned that until she woke up. It was always fascinating and a little melancholy to wake and see everything that had changed and everything that hadn't. This is something that I think is really, really interesting. And I would love a story told from the perspective completely of a being like this. Because we have lots of stories about immortal beings who just like live amongst human beings and experience the change of centuries. But this experience of being locked away and then woken, and like you're in a position not of simply a person that's immortal, but you have like this huge power and responsibility for the place itself. What a crazy amount of pressure to not only wake up and there to be this immediate expectation of service from you, but also the expectation of service is on behalf of like a country that you don't recognize anymore. So you have to get a lot of information gathered in order to have any idea what you're doing in context. And that seems like, I don't know. Of course, if you're being like this, I'm sure it's not as difficult, but that just sounds so hard to me. So anyway, she feels something approaching at this point when she is on the deck. And she has this like sort of premonition that what has been Kellerak's prison is not like holding him down anymore. He isn't here in the way that he had been. So I'm going to read this part here. She thanked the unknown god silently for protecting it all these years. Her handiwork had stood the test of time, resisting the push of hostile intent that never... Her thoughts trailed off. The intent of her guardian lantern remained bright and steady. She rushed over to the railing, extending her reader's senses out over the water. Ordinary readers wouldn't be able to sense anything from the ocean at this distance, nor would they dare to try if they could. But Loralee had been born with every bit as much talent as Esther or Alagaeus. She had honed that talent under the Emperor's tutelage, and now she extended her awareness, searching for something that should be there. A sly, cunning, hungry presence, infinitely devious and selfish. The dark intent should have lasted even longer than her guardian lantern. She couldn't feel Kellerak. The collector of souls had been imprisoned on the ocean floor only a few miles from here. Her lantern was both a defense against his influence and a boundary marker, warning people away. "The light looks healthy today," the captain observed. "That's a good omen." "No, it isn't. Captain Marstrom, it is imperative that we sail beyond that lantern immediately. And here is this moment where he's like, I'm sure you have a ton of experience, but this is like my focus. Ships that go out there don't come back. We can't do that. And she literally kneels in front of him and begs, which, can you imagine Esther 6 doing this? Like, their personalities are just such fucking polar opposites. It is wild. Esther 6 would either intimidate the man in a, like, just sort of show of force, or she would straight up knock him out and be like, all right, kids, I'm in charge now. What we're going to do is, like, it was just, this is not how it would go. And that's the only thing that made me go, maybe they don't know who she is. Because if a fucking regent is like, hey, we have to go out there, and you know that it's a regent, you really should just listen to what the fuck they're telling you to do. Like, low key, but fine. So he goes past the boundary lantern and basically is like, I'll do what you say, but if we see fucking anything weird out there, we are turning the fuck around and hightailing it back to the safe spot. And she's like, okay, fair. And then finally she says, I'm going to need you to lower me down. And he, for a moment, is like, do I need to, like, lock you in a cabin because you're suicidal? Because that's not happening. And she says, I'm going in that water whether you allow it or not. All that you get to decide is whether you're going to be here to help me back out again. So that's kind of on you. And as he finally, of course, like, capitulates, and she gets in the water and says, if you see me suddenly pulled under, if I begin speaking a language you don't understand, if you hear a voice from nowhere, or if anything rises from the depths to attack me, immediately flee for your lives. And everybody is just, like, so nervous at this point, which they fucking should be. So she slowly eases herself into the water. I was sort of picturing her jumping, but they lower a ladder and she, like, very slips in, trying not to draw too much attention to herself. The first thing that she notices is a stray child of Nikothi. And she cuts that shit up, no problem. I'm thinking that's what she sensed, and that is not what it was. She opened her eyes as wide as she could, waiting for Kellerak's power to crash into her. He would have sensed her light and would strike back to kill or possess her. The intent remained as calm as its surface. No news could have been worse. So she goes up and she tells them the capital is in danger. The people of Azyria are going to have to do without us. We really need to turn around. And this dude is like, are you sure? Because we're halfway there. We could send a message. And finally, she announces herself. And I love this moment where he, like, just coughs awkwardly and is like, yeah, babe, we're aware. It's so sweet in a way, because they're all just like, of course we're not gonna, like, put up a fight. You've only ever tried to help people. But she has a moment of embarrassment initially at realizing they knew the whole time. So yeah, the only thing we've ever heard about you is that you save people and fight elders. Why wouldn't we help you? In spite of herself, Laura Lee's eyes misted up. She always tried not to get attached to the people of the current era, knowing they would all be dead when she next woke. She always failed. And I just love that moment of her being like, damn it, you guys are great. This sucks. And she says, Kellerak is on the move, and this dude is going, all right, guys, turning around. So yeah, combined with the fact that Calder has this mark on his arm, it is not going to be any surprise if Laura Lee is like, good, glad he's dead. That was a problem. Kellerak is doing shit, you know? But we'll see, because she doesn't know about that yet. So then we go to 2 years ago, Yala being confronted by the Regents. I love this so much. She's trying to like explain what happened, and Esther interrupts and is like, no, I know what happened. It wasn't an accident. And we were woken on purpose, just not by you. And this is what's so unnerving about the confrontation, is that Esther can tell when Yala is lying, even if it's a half lie. She can sense enough in her intent to pick out the half of the lie and thus figure out what the other half is. So Esther is kind of like impossible to lie to. And Yala is trying so hard to do a little loophole over here and just be like, he didn't give instruction to wake you up. Because, like, technically, he didn't. But Esther is going, okay, I see how it is. Asher says, this is about Meia. I wonder if her wish to please her awful mother has to do with her ease at being left out of the loop with other authority figures. She's used to being seen as less than. That's an interesting thought. I could see that, just being kind of kept in your place your whole life. Yala is trying so hard to be politic and not reveal her motives, and it is just not working. It is... Asher is saying they cheered. Yeah, there is something so freeing about characters that can tell when others are lying. And, you know, it can be a double-edged sword when they're around somebody that you're rooting for them to get away with something. Then it sucks, but there's still a sense of excitement to me, because I have always been, and it doesn't always hold up, but I have always been a reader who wants my characters to communicate as much as they can. So sometimes when a character can tell a lie, it just cuts through the bullshit. And a person who's attempting to lie because they're assuming motivations of the other person, so they think lying is necessary. If the other person can tell they're lying and just shortcut it and be like, that's not what you were doing. And also, that's not what I want either. And I don't know why you thought that's what I wanted, but none of this is right. It's great, you know? So I have like a soft spot for this sort of thing. And then add it on top of the fact that I just don't like or trust Yala. And I get that she really is thinking she's doing like the best thing. But I occupy the space with her where I'm like, I just can't tell how much she really thinks she was doing the best thing, and how much she has lied to herself for long enough that she's grown to believe her own bullshit. Because those things really, the line fuzzes quite a bit, and I just don't quite know. I sort of assume that Yala's a little bit full of shit. But when we're in her POVs, it doesn't feel like she's as deluded. You know? I don't know. And then I get my question answered, because first of all, Esther knows the weapon that Shera is using is the one that drew his blood. She wanted it to, but she wasn't bloodthirsty. I think it even wounded her to do so in ways she didn't feel. And this stabbed the heart of Nakothi. The Emperor granted it power. So did Tearfang. Can you imagine just being able to like pick up an object and figure all that out? That's insane. And she sends the shear back to Shera. I was wondering if she was going to be aggro about Shera is right here and she's the one who killed this guy. No, it seems like she's just trying to establish facts before she begins doing anything. He's dead, but he didn't wake us. That's pretty interesting, don't you think? And then she drags her finger in the air, and we hear this stone grinding. And it turns out it was only Esther that initially woke up. But she is able to wake up all the others. one of my favorite things about the way that this goes is the fact that everybody seems to just think Alligaeus is a fuckboy, because he's the last one to wake up and they are conducting their business without him, and it doesn't seem to bother them at all. They aren't considering him. When he speaks up from the basement, he's just being a fucking baby, whining about how, like, I'm naked and what's this indignity. It just feels like he's not really part of the clique. Like, he's officially a regent. On paper, he's a regent. According to everything, he's a regent. But when it comes down to the way they behave, they don't really seem to see him as their peer. And I think that's fair, because he seems like a bitch. So anyway, this is when she begins to, like, question, did the Emperor tell you to wake us? No, Yala answered. Technically, she was telling the truth. Oh, I see. Half true. He told you we were down here, but he died before he could directly order us up. Yala focused on not shivering. And this is when Laura comes up and they have to tell her that he's gone. And Joran looks around and has a bit of a moment of grief, like realizing. And when he asks, where is he now? Yala is like, dead. And he's like, I know. Where did you bury him? What are you... Like, he's trying to be patient, but I can only imagine. And it turns out he has like an entire cemetery to himself and this giant monument, which I would just love. Just so many questions about how you handle the burial of a dude with that kind of power. And like, does any power remain in him in a way after his death? Like, you know how they take relics from saints, allegedly, and they'll be like, the finger bone of Saint whoever. Is that anything? I have to assume anything he touched being as valuable and awakened often as they are, that his actual body must have power. But I don't know, you know? So Laura Lee immediately heads over to Shera, and it says, Laura Lee lifted the silver sun-shaped medallion from her neck. She knelt next to Shera, raising her soul-bound vessel high. This was the first beacon, the original that all Luminian pilgrims in history had copied. She was the original pilgrim, the original knight as well, the tactician, warlord, healer, visionary, religious icon, Laura Lee, daughter of the Emperor. Wild. I mean, that is just so cool. And it makes me think about how when Shera went into the Luminian headquarters and the building made her feel immediately safe, and she just distrusted it right away. And I'm like, it seems like that shit's valid, though. It seems like it's real. But Shera doesn't like Laura Lee that much either, so makes sense. So yeah, she manages to like heal Shera pretty easily, and Yala, who had been low-key hoping Shera would die so that there's nobody to like countermand her story, is watching this going, oh wow, I am really fucked now. Shit. And Esther asks, what do you know about the Emperor's death? So Yala tries to buy time and be like, hey, the team is here. They're not allowed to know. And it just takes an instant for Esther to get everybody to stand and walk out. Like, it seems like she's sort of controlling their bodies, which is not my favorite. And she says, she decides to tell the truth as much as she can. The heart that had sustained his life had begun taking a toll on him. Sensing this, he selected 3 young gardeners in training to become a team that would watch over him. He wished to train them into a force that could do what was necessary when the time came. And Joran's like, okay, so clearly these 2, who is the third one? And she admits it was her daughter. And Esther is like, so who had decided that the time had come to do it? I am not clear enough on the details to answer that with certainty. Yala had, of course, done her research, but the events that had occurred inside the Emperor's chambers were known fully only to the Emperor and his personal gardeners. I was not present that night. But Shera was. Yala didn't say it aloud, but she hoped the implication would drive the Regent to anger. Which, Yala... What a bitch. And I don't mean it in the aggressive you're being a bitch move. I mean a little bitch. You are being so shady and shitty. Ew. Esther floated over to Shera, holding her hand over the gardener's body. And she doesn't let Yala know anything about what she figured out from doing this. How long has it been? About 3 years. 3 years. So let's run this backward. These gardeners, these particular assassins, risked their lives to free us. After 3 years in which the Consultants Guild let us sleep at the Empire, as the Empire rotted around us. And before that, the Emperor told you he intended to release us before his death. Am I right? Yala swallowed, but didn't retreat. He didn't leave us instructions, so we had to use our own judgment. We have worked ourselves to the bone holding the Empire together. And at this point it says Esther Six's gaze softened into what Yala thought must be weariness. True. That's true. At least you believe it. And then Laura Lee comes over and literally holds her face between her hands. She holds Yala's face. You've carried a hard burden, Laura Lee said softly, harder than anyone else knows. You have lived a life in service to the Empire. Thank you. Thank you for what you have done. And you can set part of your burden down. We are here now. Yala was shocked to find her eyes watering, her heart rising into her throat. She couldn't remember the last time she had wept. And Esther is like, what are you doing? She's all sad now. You're thanking her, and we were about to sort of... And Laura Lee says she made a hard decision. She has her rough edges, but she made it as best she could. Why should we punish her for that? And I don't know. It's just like, anytime that I come across a character like Laura Lee or like Ted Lasso, I'm like, God, why can't I be like better? Why can't I just be more forgiving and like generous? I try to be in a way that can almost result in the opposite happening, where I like second guess everything. I try and like base my empathy and stuff on facts. And sometimes that's really not helpful. It's not about facts, it's just about a person being like a human being. But I have a really hard time with holding my judgment about stuff. And I just really liked this moment and the fact that like Yala gets so choked up, and there's a sense for me at least, of almost Yala not realizing how tired and drained she is by everything until Laura Lee points it out. Like, I think this can really happen where you just get so embedded in your own shit and you start to get very reactive about stuff. And it's not until you dig and ask yourself sometimes, why am I reacting so weirdly or strongly or over the top to certain things? And once you like back it up, you kind of have to go, oh God, it's because I feel like completely overwhelmed and like there's no end in sight. And what I'm saying is Yala needs to go to therapy. Everybody needs therapy all the time anyway, but like that was what I got there, is Yala having a bit of a moment going, yeah, I would really like it if I wasn't in charge. Like, we know she didn't want this job to begin with. So it seems like Laura Lee is picking up on that and just kind of going, all right, you didn't want it. Well, we're here and you don't need to do it anymore, And let's see. A short, squat Heartlander emerged from the trapdoor, scowling at everything and everyone. Is this how they treat their betters in this age, keeping us to mold in a basement? Alagaeus, Esther said quietly, if you smile or laugh or say anything to set my teeth on edge, I'm throwing you into the moon. So, you have chosen to rule as a tyrant after all. I thought your nobility was too important to you. He's dead. And that is the moment where he sort of stops and is like, oh shit, I guess we have a lot we're going to need to do, actually. And I love Laura Lee goes over and hugs him, and he just stiffens up and is just like, what is this? What is this? Ew. Yala didn't dare interrupt. She bent every thought, every scrap of her intent, and every fiber of her body into pretending she didn't exist. Then Shera sat up, eyes wide, gasping for breath, and drawing a weapon. And I was just... Of course she did. So then we go to chapter 19, and this is when we're in Meia's POV. And she goes down to speak to Jyrene, and this was fascinating. Again, we have this moment where she's thinking about the fact that Calder is dead, and she seems to believe it. He had been marked by Kellerak, but the Emperor had carried around a Great Elder's heart for almost 2,000 years. And I was like, actually, that's kind of a good point. The fact that he was marked, and I think the assumption is simply the Emperor was so powerful that there was no doubt he could maintain control of himself. And just nobody believes that about Calder because he hasn't really shown himself to be exceptional in any particular way. So, yeah, I can understand why people aren't taking it, but I think she makes a good point. And she decides that she is going to visit his wife sort of as a gesture, because there's not a lot she can do to honor his memory yet because they don't have the body. He hasn't been buried. His death isn't public knowledge. She had intended to visit a grave, but there isn't one yet. So she goes and meets with Jyrene, and what she does here is lights incense, and it is of a type, it's like a drug that gets her to open up and tell the truth. And when she meets with Jyrene, Meia is expecting for Jyrene to not know who she is and is a little surprised that Jyrene greets her by name. And this is when Meia says, the guilds have reached a peaceful agreement. I have been sent to ask you a few questions about the Sleepless Cult. If you cooperate, I can authorize a few concessions to your accommodations. So she asks first, what do you know about the intentions of the Great Elders? And Meia is able to breathe this because of all of the weird shit that's been done to her. She doesn't have to, cover her mouth or nose, which would give away the fact that there is something about this smoke that affects people. So she is just letting this do its thing. And Jyrene says, the Great Elders want to pass through the crack in the sky in order to ascend beyond this world. This isn't their home. They're trying to leave. So you see, we're really trying to help you. How do they plan to leave? I don't know. But they're supposed to take human vessels. And I'm like, they're what now? Well, we have conflicting reports. Some say they can't leave unless they're in the form of a person, but others suggest they could leave, but they seek human bodies anyway. In the Elder War, some fought in human bodies at first before reverting to their true forms, but some didn't. So are you, offering, Jyrene? Why? Whose bodies? Is it... I just don't know what she is thinking is going to happen here. And what do the Sleepless want? Jyrene brightened. As Lucan had once mentioned, She seemed like she was desperate to share her point of view with someone. We're working to secure a bargain with the Great Elders so they will leave their power and knowledge with us when they depart. That's why we need Calder. If he can negotiate with them directly, he can get their concessions. He might even be able to open the crack in the sky himself and let them out without any conflict. I've told him about that, Meia interrupted. How do we heal the sky? I don't know. I can't even begin to guess. It was made by the Optasia as the result of a plan by Akhmagut. As far as we know, they were never able to do so much even at the height of the Elder War. I see. I'd like to speak some more about your knowledge of the Great Elders, but first we've talked about the desires of the Sleepless and the Elders. But what do you want, Jyrene? And I like this because Meia is sort of admitting to herself, this isn't really for posterity. Like, I just want to know. She's turned traitor on all of humanity, and like, what makes somebody do that? And Jyrene says, I want it all to be worth it. My father sacrificed his career, his reputation, and eventually his life because he believed the elders were the path to a better world. I've given up everything myself. I don't want it to be for nothing. And if we don't get it now on our terms, with someone on the throne speaking on behalf of humanity, then the elders will break us, get what they want anyway, and then we either cooperate with them or we're trampled beneath them. Calder can give them what they want from us while getting what we want from them. It's symbiosis. But if he won't do it, then I'll do whatever it takes to strike an agreement. If they're going to break us anyway, we need a foundation to rebuild. And she sort of realizes at this point that she is speaking with an openness that is not natural to her. And she looks at the incense and looks at Meia. And I love Meia, like, letting her put the pieces together and just sort of watching and being like, oh boy, it is so much fun to watch somebody realize that they have let the cat out of the bag, basically. And she gets up and calls her Miss Tesla instead of Mrs. Martin. And she walks out and says over her shoulder, if you really intend to lean on the power of the elders to protect us from the destruction of the elders, then you're even more of a fool than I took you for. Would you adopt a wild wolf to protect you from wolf attacks? And Jyrene says Kellerak keeps his bargains. Ask Calder. I will, she said lightly. Then she left. So Meia doesn't tell her that he's dead, because she's just kind of like, what's the point in sharing info for free? I may as well just keep her knowing exactly as much as she needs to know. And I was like, that's a good point. As somebody who just cannot shut the fuck up, this is the shit that I could really learn from. And there are many times in my life that I look back and I just started talking and like got people in trouble without even realizing I was, because I just opened my mouth and began saying, because I am a communicator, and realized a bit too late that I had fucked things up for somebody and not meant to. So then we go to Shera. And this is, let's see. To Shera, victory in the Guild War felt like having 1,000 new responsibilities pushed on her. While the Imperial Guard had mostly returned to Joran, even he hadn't been able to wake Gerald's teach. Shera had gone to see her in person, finding the head of the Imperial Guard in a strange, transformative coma. Her hair had turned navy blue, growing out far longer than Teach had preferred it, and her pale skin was stained in patches of purple. Her cheekbones stood out more sharply, and it looked like she'd lost weight, although that could have been due to the coma more than any transformation. And Shera is thinking they are holding her, Shera, responsible for this. Dozens of reports from shepherds and masons suggested that the guards thought Joran was refusing to treat her, not that he had failed, and every member of their guild blamed the independents for fighting in the first place. Bliss of the Black Watch had simply vanished. She'd had a showdown of some kind with Barius, but Shera hadn't read it yet, and afterward dropped off the planet. She had a showdown with Barrios. I want to know about that very much, please. Like, I remember her talking about how she never wants his name said around her. Like, she hates this guy, which I assume he is responsible for her being what she is. But I really want, because like later on, there's a scene with him where he's talking about the objectives that lay ahead of them. And he is extremely emphatic about Bliss needing to be taken out. He says it multiple times. And basically by the end is like, if we do nothing else, we have to get rid of her. And I am like, well, the fact that you want that so bad and you are such a piece of shit makes me go Team Bliss all the way. So the Magisters and Champions still hadn't elected another guild head. That was both a blessing and a curse, as Shera didn't have more opponents to wrangle, but at the same time there was no one to lead their guilds. They were locked in a stalemate. Her own allies were just as bad. Thomas Stillwell had taken the Green Wardens and left the capital. He sent his regrets, saying his health didn't allow him to stay longer. His guild members had to care for their chimera, but they were all excuses. He had done nothing throughout the conflict, and he was still taking any opportunity to do nothing. Jameson Albright was, well, Shera didn't have much to criticize the old man for, except that the Luminian Order was stretched thin. They'd lost too many members in the fighting, and knights were difficult to replace. He was focused on rebuilding broken lines of communication all over the world so that he could coordinate order resources around sites of heavy elder activity, but it was slow going. He was the only one working longer hours than perhaps even Joran himself, which now left Shera in a meeting with the only guild head who was her equal in power and influence, Nathaniel Barrios. And I love this so much. He has created this whole fucking like PowerPoint presentation, charts and graphs about what they need to do. And what it all boils down to is kill the guild heads that we don't trust. But he is just talking around it in this giant, like, if this isn't just a microcosm of what it's like to work with a group, I don't know what is. Because people will make a meal out of the most basic things. And throughout all of this, Shera is just thinking, I don't want to do this. I don't want to be killing other guild heads. Like, I get why he thinks that's what we should do, but I am not interested. I don't want this job. I don't want to be here. And there is a couple of moments where she's just going, no, we're not going to do that. Can I leave? And he finally sort of pushes it a little bit. Yala says at one point, we should give it consideration after the regents have stepped down. The regional governors are supported and the guilds are established as independent entities. Shera jerked a thumb at Yala. Sounds great. I'm leaving now. Barrios laughed, though Shera hadn't been joking. I wouldn't want to imply anything, of course, but it almost sounds like the head of the Consultants Guild isn't willing to give the guild matters her full attention. There are those who might suggest that such a person isn't suited to be a guild head at all. He raised both hands. Not me, you understand. Other people. And Yala is like, he's right, though. Shera is like, I am not suited for this position, which is part of why I'm fucking leaving. So she's getting up and kind of thinking, I would really like to kill this guy. And both of her vessels are going, nah, dude. Which Cyphrin is always for killing. So that really takes her by surprise. That they are actually in agreement here. Cyphrin just says, why bother? There's like way better people to kill. Close. Why? No. And Bastion is like, yeah, he is not a threat at all. And I am so worried that it's going to turn out they're all being tricked and he's like the biggest threat of all. But I just think he seems like a nuisance. That's the way I'm viewing him pretty much. And she's got her hand on the doorknob. And this is when he basically is like, if you're not going to do your job, something might happen to you. And she turns and says, does your guild make sedatives? And he's like, yeah. And she says, I've been told you were up at 3 o'clock the last 4 mornings in a row, and you were such a sound sleeper before. Try to sleep well, guild head. So are you just are you just like keep one eye open? Is that what that meant? Because that didn't sit as a threat for me. It was supposed to be, clearly. But I didn't feel it as a threat. Or is it just supposed to be like, we've got people watching you, so I know how often, like, when you wake up and you know, I just didn't really get what was, and usually in Will White's writing, the threats are very clear. And this one just didn't quite land for me. So at this point, she leaves and Yala follows her and is like, dude, what are you doing? You know that he has more money than God. He could hire all the champions and completely fuck us up. But if you were on our side, he could fund the guild forever. Like, why would you ruin the potential to have an ally here? And she just cuts through it all and asks where Carrion is. And when she goes to see Carrion, and I'm having to speed this up a little because I'm over time, but Carrion basically tells Shera, I have this thing drawn up where you will, it says, it's stated that Shera would retain the title of guild head, but would rely on the Council of Architects for day-to-day maintenance of guild affairs. And Shera goes to sign it, has to stop and be like, this isn't a fucking trick or something, right? Carrion reassures her. She signs it. And as they're talking about it, just kind of is like, I had really hoped that you would just get used to this job, though. It's a shame it hasn't worked out. And then Darius Albright shows up. And Shera had been about to, like, climb out the window before he showed. And when he expresses a desire to see her specifically, she continues trying to scoot on out of there until Carrion is like, you told me I could call on you whenever I wished. So she tells him, don't bother me unless it's absolutely vital. And he's like, yeah, I think it is. We've lost contact with our units around Urgnaut's tomb. The few watchmen I've been able to track down said that the Black Watch have had similar trouble with other tombs. Typically, our guilds cooperate to maintain security, but the guild war has strained that relationship. And Carrion says, okay, so this is a request to reestablish communication with elder tombs. Shera pointed to Carrion. Then you're talking to the right person. I have resigned. I know most people don't know that. And Darius just basically is like, well, it's a really hard job and it's really tiring, so I can understand why you would just not want to do it anymore. And she is so shocked at how, like, empathetic he is that she decides to be nice and just ask him about his situation and says, what's going to happen to you if the great elders rise? And he's just like, I do not know. I mean, I would like to say that I'm going to ask for strength, but how much of that would I need to go up against the great elders? And it says, she remembered the Emperor's body shuddering as she plunged her knife into his heart. There was one responsibility she still had, guildhead or not. Don't worry, she assured him. If a great elder takes over your body, I'll kill you myself. That should put him at ease. She really thinks that that's, like, just gonna calm him down. Like, truly. So the chapter, we have, like, a brief moment with a guard discovering that Gyrene has busted out. I do not like this at all. I'm assuming that Calder jumped in and did something. And then we go to Urgnaut's tomb, and Gyrene is freeing him and kind of telling herself that whatever happens as a result of this is everyone's own fault. That essentially she's been left with no other choices And if they had only listened to her, she wouldn't have been driven to this. And let's see. She threw in the object she had carried there, the gift Kellerak had given her, a heart of Nikothi. A breeze caressed her cheek, whispering into her ear, "Deliver a message for me, High Priestess of the Void. Tell Kellerak I will stop the outsider once I find a vessel, but until then, I will pursue my purpose." Outsider? Who is that? Is that Shera? What is that? And to you, I must apologize. I cannot bring you into oblivion. You must suffer the pain of existence for a short time longer. Which, honestly, it's him being like, hey, sorry, I can't kill you. Which most people would be like, no, I'm good. That's fine. Thank you. But then there are people like Rashawn, who if he said you must suffer the pain of existence for a short time longer, and Rashawn would just be like, fuck, come on, man. So it ends with the Regents would fall, the guilds would fall, the great elders would destroy the old order so that they could leave this world behind and move on to greater things. And she would inherit their legacy. And she goes back to Kellerak. And I'm just like, Jyrene, why do you think this is going to do? What? She being dumb. She is not... Whatever. She's free to make her bad decisions. But I am disgusted. I'm just on record saying that. All right. So I'm going to wrap this up. Thank you again, Asher, for hanging out. I'm sorry I didn't get to every comment you made. I'm over time as it is. But yeah, appreciate it. Really enjoying this. And I'll be seeing you guys soon with a new episode. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.